boroughs, but also in my spare time, I suppose, I represent the LGBT plus officers in the Metropolitan Police as the co-chair of our staff support network, which is an internal network aiming to support, coach, mentor, and guide all of our LGBT plus officers across London. And I also represent the London region at our regional and national networks, where I'm able to take learning from London and our London experience and feed that in at the national level. And that's why I'm here to talk to you this evening, to give a presentation on LGBT history. I'm hoping that some of you will recognize some of the issues that I'm going to talk to you about, and why I think that those issues are still relevant today, and the connection that we have between those issues and policing in the modern Met and in London in 2021 and beyond. Now, I have got a slideshow presentation. My beautiful assistant, PC Pete Truman, who's going to be speaking to you a bit later, is going to support me in going through this, because we don't actually use Zoom in the Met. I'm talking to you through my own iPhone because of security issues that we have with our work laptop. So do forgive us if we're a bit slow on the slide deck. I almost feel like I'm on the government Downing Street presentation where I say, next slide, please. So please bear with me. Thank you, Pete. That's the introduction and who I am. So we're going to be talking about the history of policing and LGBT plus communities. Where are we now and what the challenges are for London? And I hope you find what we're going to be talking about of interest. Please feel free to use the chat bar, and we're going to take questions at the end, I think. And I'd be really happy to take any question from you, not just on this topic, but on any question you might have about policing for the London area. Thanks, Pete. So let's start 100 years ago. I want to take you back to Berlin in 1920. Berlin was the gay capital of Europe, if not the world. It had the world's first gay village, really, much sooner and earlier than Soho ever did. There were LGBT bars, nightclubs, films, music, art, and newspapers. A really liberal city to live in and really diverse. And in fact, the authorities were planning to decriminalize homosexuality as early as 1929. And the chap you can see on your screens now is called Magnus Hirschfeld. And Magnus was a Jewish psychologist. He was a German doctor, and he really was the first influential advocate for gay and transgender rights. He set up what was known as the Scientific Humanitarian Committee, where he campaigned for social recognition of LGBT rights. And also he was a really strong campaigner for women's rights as well. And he traveled the world in his work. He visited the USA, Chicago, much of Europe, the Far East, and he developed a theory around the universality of homosexuality in a global perspective. So in effect, what he was saying in his research, that homosexuality was completely normal and part of human society. And he really became interested in gay rights because many of his gay patients had taken their own lives through suicide. Now, suicide was a real taboo in 19th century Germany, and there was in particular one incident which really drove his commitment to that cause. He was treating a patient for depression, and the patient was a young army officer. And that young army officer killed himself in 1896, and he'd left a suicide note to his parents. And in the note, he wrote that he lacked the strength to tell his parents the truth, and spoke of his shame. And he said, "Of that which nearly strangled my heart." And that being his sexuality. He referred to Dr. Hirschfeld in his note And in the note, he said that the thought that you could contribute to a future when Germany will think in more just terms sweetens the hour of my death. And so that really resonated and had a significant impact on Magnus. And he campaigned for scientific research, campaigned to repeal laws which criminalized homosexuality, and really started to make a really significant difference to the lives of LGBT plus people in Europe, and in particular in Germany in the 1920s. However, as we all know now, and as happened then, things can change very quickly in politics. Thanks, Pete. It changed quickly because this is Nazi Germany only 13 years later. And you'll all know that amongst other communities, Nazi Germany targeted in particular the gay community. Dr. Hirschfeld's premises were attacked, documents and books were burned, and he actually fled to Greece. All of the clubs and bars and institutes in Berlin were shut down, and the Gestapo started compiling lists of people, mainly men. There were 100,000 arrested and jailed, and 15,000 sent to concentration camps. And the death rate was around about 60%. You'll see there that those who were suspected of being homosexuals had a pink inverted triangle on their overalls, and that triangle, for example, was used as target practice from the towers by the Gestapo, and many of these gay men were subjected to medical experiments. And so the relationship, I suppose, between authorities and the gay community started really being significantly impacted probably from this point. Thanks, Pete. Now, I want to take you forward to the next decade, 1952. And I hope that some of you will know the picture of the man that you're looking at, and that's Alan Turing. And Alan worked at Bletchley Park, the old version of the modern GCHQ, and he worked there during the war. He was a mathematical genius and a code breaker. And he designed the world's first computer. He cracked the Nazi Germany Enigma machine. And in doing so, it's widely thought that he shortened the war by around 2 years and saved, we think, around about 14 million lives. But some people don't know that in January 1952, he was 39, the war had ended, and he met Arnold Murray. Murray was a younger man, and they began dating. And on the 23rd of January, 1952, Alan's house was burgled, and he did what most of us now would do, and that was called the police. And 2 police officers turned up at Alan's house, and he invited them in. And during the course of the conversation that followed, and during their inquiries into the burglary, he acknowledged his relationship with Arnold to those officers. Now, instead of dealing with the burglary, the officers turned their attention to the relationship between the 2 men. And of course, at that time, it was illegal to be in a relationship. And as a consequence, the police charged both of the men with gross indecency. And the matter was brought to trial on the 31st of March, 1952. Both men were encouraged to plead guilty. Arnold Murray, the younger man, was given a conditional discharge, which effectively meant that he could leave court without punishment, with a slap on the wrist, effectively. But because Alan was older, he was given 2 options, imprisonment or probation. And probation for Alan, to avoid him going to prison, would mean that he would be compelled to undergo chemical castration. And so that was a series of injections of synthetic estrogen over a course of 12 months. And the chemical castration rendered him impotent. It caused him to grow breast tissue. And of course, in terms of his work, he had his removal of his security clearance because of the conviction, and he was sacked from his work. He was then barred from GCHQ. He was also barred from entering the United States to work. And tragically, as a consequence of all those events, Alan committed suicide in June 1954, aged 41. And some of you may have seen the film The Imitation Game, which depicts Alan's life. I'm glad to say that that Her Majesty the Queen gave Alan a posthumous pardon in 2013, and as a result of his story, the government introduced what's commonly known as the Alan Turing Law, which is actually officially known as the Police and Crime Act 2017. And that act has seen the pardoning of men who were cautioned and convicted of offences which would no longer be criminal. So we've seen just shy of 50,000 individuals since or up to January 2017 pardoned for those offences. But I think, and the reason I've included this is just to demonstrate this isn't that long ago, 1952, you know, it's a generation ago. And again, it just demonstrates to you some of the levels of distrust that are generational between LGBT plus people and the authorities, not just the police, but the authorities, and really tragic circumstances for Alan. Now, let's fast forward into the next decade and zoom across the pond into America. And here's New York City.
Can we just swap interpreters, sorry?
Sure. Okay, so here's New York City, 1969, and this is the Stonewall riots. I'm sure many of you will have heard of this. And it was a police raid of the Stonewall Inn, which is in Greenwich Village in Manhattan, a famous village. I hope some of you have had the opportunity to go and see it. And the Stonewall Inn's is still there. This really was about the Stonewall Uprising, gay liberation, the police treatment of LGBT people, overzealous behavior, excessive use of force, and abuse of power. So it really was seen as the modern fight for LGBT rights in the US. At that time, there was an anti-gay legal system. There was the counterculture of the 1960s, the civil rights movement, the anti-Vietnam War movement. And so all of those things really, I suppose, created a tinderbox of tension and anxiety. And the Stonewall Inn, the pub in the background there from that picture, was actually owned by the mafia, the Italian mafia. And customers who frequented the pub were in their upper teens, early 30s, so young people. And they were mainly white, black, and from the Hispanic community. And the NYPD, the New York Police Department, had at that time what they called the Public Morals Squad, which I know is kind of hard to believe now. This is not, again, not that long ago, the Public Morals Squad. And what sparked this disorder was that a policeman hit a woman over the head. He dragged her into a van. And as that was happening, she screamed to the watching crowd, "Why don't you guys do something?" She's widely thought to be Storm Delivery. Some of you may have heard of Storm. I always get her name wrong. And she created a situation where people did get involved and they did create an uprising, and the police were quickly overwhelmed. It didn't help that there was rumor that the police were receiving money from the Italian mafia. There was police bribery at that time, and that the reason for this particular intervention was that they hadn't received their payoff that week. And it really led to a significant uprising of marches, demonstrations more violence, and that spread right across the United States. And of course, with most things that start in the US, those same demonstrations landed here on the streets of London. And the Gay Liberation Front was born in London in 1970. And then the Gay Pride March that followed was in 1972. Now, I just want to take you forward again to the next decade and 1986. Some of you may remember what you're seeing on the screen here. 1986, we saw the HIV and AIDS crisis. And between the 1980s, 2018, around the globe, 32 million people died. And this virus had a disproportionate impact on young men in the gay community and created an enormous amount of fear. And the tabloids demonized gay and bi men. You can see some of the tabloid headlines there. Scare stories being reported about how you could catch AIDS from toilet seats, cups, horrendous levels of misinformation, and a national public awareness campaign. You can see over on the right-hand side of this particular slide, the advert that some of you may remember. The voiceover was by John Hurt, and a leaflet was sent to every single household. I can remember a leaflet being delivered to my household and asking my parents what AIDS was and what it meant. Now, some people say that that campaign was extremely effective, and others say that that's completely magnified fear amongst the LGBT community. But whichever view you take, there is absolutely no doubt that it stigmatized the gay community. And in fact, in that year in 1986, from a policing context, the chief constable, so the head of, very senior officer, the head of Greater Manchester Police, one of the UK's largest police forces, referred to the gay community in the press as, and I'll quote what he said, swirling about in a human cesspit of their own making. And all of that narrative drove political agendas in anti-LGBT rhetoric, almost like a burn the witches at the stake rhetoric. And people who I've spoken to who lived through that have explained the impact that that had on them and the impact and fear that they felt about the police and other statutory authorities and their relationship amongst the wider community, really. Now, let's go to another couple of years in 1988 and what happened next, because many of you will know that that saw the introduction of Section 28 of the Local Government Act 1988. It effectively banned education or even the discussion of the possibility of same-sex relationships. Councils were banned from stocking literature or films. Anything to do with gay or lesbian themes had to be removed. And it was considered at that time to be the first homophobic law to be introduced in over 100 years in the United Kingdom. And just a year later, actually, the year before, 1987, at the Conservative Party conference in Blackpool, you can see the then Prime Minister Maggie Thatcher. And she said at that conference, whilst on the podium, children who need to be taught to respect traditional moral values are in fact being taught that they have an inalienable right to be gay. All of those children are being cheated of a sound start in life. Yes, cheated. And so that context of the Prime Minister creating that narrative, a really important event, and introducing laws which effectively banned the conversation was really significant for our LGBT community. Now, of course, let's just go forward one slide, Pete, because I'm hoping that many of you will have seen a depiction of that decade. And It's a Sin, an absolutely brilliant series. If you haven't seen it, please do watch it. Colourful, vibrant, fascinating, and devastating in equal measure. I think for me, the last 100 years, as you can see, have been a building of distrust of the authorities, the police, and all of that, added to government policy, is in the DNA of many of London's gay community, and why it's so important that the police have got such a significant role to play in fixing that. Now, I just want to canter through some of the other events of those decades, Pete, if you wouldn't mind. Here we have 1990, so just a couple of years after the 80s, we saw the first formation of the Lesbian and Gay Police Association. The same year, Justin Fashioney, the first professional footballer to come out as gay, committed suicide. He hung himself, was found hanged in a garage in Shoreditch. 1995, Mermaids was founded by a group of parents. 1999, we saw the Trans Day of Remembrance founded in the US. 1999, 3 people were killed, 70 injured in the Admiral Duncan bomb in Soho, targeted hate campaign. Thank you, Pete. Let's go through to the noughties. So 2000, the government lifted the ban on lesbians, gay men and bi people serving in the armed forces. By this time, I was a serving police officer. 2000, we saw the campaign to reduce the age of consent for same-sex relationships. 2003, Section 28 was repealed, thankfully, lifting the ban. And 2003, same year, the police took part in the London Pride in uniform for the first time, a really significant event, not just for those officers, but for the community who had such a difficult relationship with the police. And of course, in 2004, the Civil Partnership Act was passed. Thank you, Pete. There are other events. So the Equality Act, Jodie Dabrowski murdered 2005 in a horrendous homophobic attack. I've already mentioned Alan Turing giving a posthumous pardon. The Marriage Act came into force 2014, and as great as that was, 2016, 49 people tragically killed, murdered, 53 people injured after a gunman opened fire in the Pulse nightclub, an LGBT safe space in Orlando. Thank you, Pete. 2016, we all see the coroner's inquest into the murders at the hands of Stephen Port, but 2016, he was convicted of the murder of 4 young men over in North London and multiple serious sexual assaults. Many of you might or might not know that in 2019, my colleagues here in the Met were able to thwart a terror plot where London Pride was due to be targeted. We've seen sexual offences against LGBT communities. So Reynard Sinaga was convicted of nearly 160 sex offences, including a huge 136 rapes of young men. We saw the online events for Pride in 2020 targeted by right-wing groups online to try and disrupt celebrations. We've seen LGBT community confidence in policing falling. And of course, in 2020, you may have seen this in the press, but Pride in London Executive Board were considering removing police from the Pride parade due to the concerns raised by the Black Lives Matter movement and demonstrations. Thanks, Pete. Now, I just want to talk very quickly. That slide there depicts police forces across England and Wales. There are 43, and we are really lucky now, 2021, most of those police forces have an LGBT network representing LGBT officers and staff who work within those police forces. And I'm sure you'll agree with me that having representation in the police at the senior levels as well is so important for us to be able to support our LGBT communities. Success is predicated on chief officer support. We're really lucky in the Met that we've got Cressida, or Cress as she likes to be called, as the head of our organisation. an openly gay woman, which has made such a huge difference to the Met, in my view. But I would generalize that much of our chief officer support is from female officers. And I still believe that some straight men feel uncomfortable around LGBT issues. There's only one male chief officer, so chief constable level, who I've heard of today, which is the temporary chief constable of British Transport Police. But other than him, I don't know any around the country. So we've still got a significant level of work to do. But we've got some great support from female straight allies right across the country in very senior levels. So what does our network look like? Let's just go to the next slide, Pete. I'm just going to show you briefly, that's a depiction of all of the different forces. I told you there were 43. Each of them has got a regional rep, and right at the center there, we have two brilliant co-chairs nationally who drive work on the LGBT, both look at internal issues to support our staff and our officers, and also look at ways we can better support the community and ensure that the police are representing the views and making sure that our service is delivered to the needs of LGBT plus communities. And we've got real diversity of perspective in there. Pete, if we move forward onto the next slide.
Dan, are you okay to hold for a second while we change interpreters?
Sure.
Thank you.
Great. So what do we do in the LGBT staff network? Well, we've got over 1,000 members of our network. So take reassurance that if you're an LGBT person living in London, we've got well over 1,000 LGBT people working in the Met. We've got two co-chairs. I'm one, and PC Kate Fletcher is the other. We've got a secretary, treasurer. We've got events, welfare support. We've got media and comms people. And most importantly, we've got an LGBT advisor coordinator. So the advisor role is really important. We've introduced that across all of the London boroughs, and LGBT advisors exist to drive community engagement and to make sure that there are really strong links between the police and LGBT communities and that their needs are met. We're really, really proud of the work that we've done there. And many of the police forces across the UK are following the Met's lead in introducing advisors in their police force areas. And that's really important because I'd hate for us to go back in time to some of the dark days of policing in Alan Turing's generation. Over 50% of our colleagues on our executive board are Black and minority ethnic colleagues. So we have intersectional viewpoints and perspectives, which again are really, really important. And so I think we've got a really diverse and eclectic group of people who I have the absolute privilege of leading at the moment. Thank you, Pete, for the next slide. This is what we do. So welfare support for staff. We assist in the Stonewall Workplace Equality Index submission. So Stonewall come and do an assessment on the way that the Met are working with LGBT communities. We help with community confidence. We work with a range of partners. We do mentoring and coaching for our own LGBT officers, and we support young cadets who are LGBT. So we've just recently set up a support network for cadets who are volunteering, who are aged from around 12 to 18, who have created their own support network. So really, really important for the next generation. And we do things like social events, parenting events, peer support, education, and we have a seat at some strategic level meetings where we're able to share views with the commissioner and her management board. Thank you, Pete. Some of the challenges that we've got at the moment, I hope many of you will know what that flag is. It's the trans flag. So blue for boy, pink for girl, and white for transitioning. But some real challenges for our trans communities at the moment. The government's scrapping reform of the Gender Recognition Act, despite 70% of people from a survey of 100,000 being supportive of it. Concerns around, from some, around safeguards to protect single-sex spaces for women. And globally, we've got countries like Ireland, Denmark, Norway, Belgium, all reforming their equality provision. And yet countries like the US, until recently, Poland and the UK, either stripping back or actively pausing progressive equality legislation. So a challenge for us all, really. And I'm really pleased to say that in the Met, we've got growing numbers of trans officers joining us. And so really important for me and my colleagues of all ranks and levels to make sure that those staff are supported, and that we can support the trans community without being accused by some of being politically motivated. It's really important for the police to be politically neutral, and walking that can sometimes be a really difficult tightrope, because some groups will accuse us of being political and becoming involved in things that the police shouldn't become involved with. So a really tricky tightrope to walk. A good example of that was during the Black Lives Matter protest around officers taking the knee, and some sections of our community saying that they were making a political statement, and other sections of our community saying that they were just promoting a symbol of anti-racism in society. So you can understand that for some, policing is too much, and for others, policing is not enough. Thank you, Pete, for the next slide. Intersectionality, I've mentioned this. So really fortunate in our executive board, we've got Latino, Sikh, Muslim, Afro-Caribbean, female, bi, non-binary, trans, and those with disabilities represented here in the Met at our network executive committee. And so it's really important to understand how all of those aspects of identity overlap. So whether it's race, class, gender identity, faith, sexual orientation, those who might be less able-bodied. And for some people, it's like a race in policing in their careers with lots of hurdles, and some people have far more hurdles than others. And so my job and that of our executive committee is to try and help those colleagues navigate those really difficult converging hurdles. And you know, we're seeing increasing levels, worrying levels of racism and intolerance globally, and these conversations that we have within policing help us to navigate all of that. Thank you, Pete, for the next slide. This just mentions challenges in intersectionality. Again, as I mentioned, the picture on the right just gives a picture. It's easy for companies, organizations to pigeonhole people into gender identity or sexual orientation or race. But the difficult conversations come in the middle there, where race converges with disability, converges with gender identity and sexual orientation. And we're really lucky that Ubaid, my friend and colleague, is going to talk to you tonight about his experiences. Thank you, Pete. The next slide. Some of you will have seen as well, you know, these things, LGBT, anti-LGBT sentiment has not gone away. This was recently where there was a protest outside a school saying no to the promoting of homosexuality, which caused an awful lot of stress and anxiety to a large number of people. Again, the police having to get involved in those different converging groups. And hate crime's not gone away. So you may remember the attack on the two young women on a London night bus when they were attacked by a group of young boys. I'm glad to say that the police caught those perpetrators and they were convicted at court. But these things aren't going away, and it's really important that we keep this at the forefront of our minds when having these sorts of conversations. It's really important that the police understand and that these offences are reported to us and we treat them really seriously when they are. Thank you, Pete. Here's what we're changing. So I'm not going to read through each, we simply haven't got time, but I've mentioned the new police LGBT advisors. We've introduced over 250 of them across London. We've got new chief inspectors who are reviewing our hate crime provision and the service that we provide to make sure that it's some of the best in the country, learning from mistakes that we might have made before. We're working with senior officers to make sure that organisational learning is embedded right across the Met. So I mentioned already tonight Stephen Port murders. So the coronial inquest will take place, and we'll make sure that any learning that comes out of that is heard, understood, and that the Met changes in accordance with any findings from that coroner's inquest. Thank you, Pete. Here's some stuff that our LGBT advisors do. They've got a guidance manual. We give them some kit to do their work properly. You might see this branding around, but it's really important for me and for colleagues on our executive committee and nationally that we raise the visibility of LGBT people. And as serving police officers, we, in my view, are role models, and we've got a responsibility to make ourselves and therefore our own communities visible in a really positive way. And I hope that that's what we're doing, not just tonight, but on other events that we've got planned across LGBT History Month and the rest of the year. Thank you, Pete. Now, I'm just about to close for my section of the presentation, but let me show you a PC. He's called Harry Daly. I wanted to finish on a high. Now, we started off in 1920 in Berlin, so let me finish off in 1921 in the Met. And Harry was the Met's first openly gay officer at a time when it was completely illegal to be gay. He was an absolute trailblazer for the Met. He was born in 1901 in Suffolk. He had 4 brothers and sisters. His dad was a fisherman. Unfortunately, tragically, his dad died in 1911 when Harry was 10. We had the outbreak of the First World War in 1916, and his older brother died just a few days before the armistice in 1918. So he lost his dad and his older brother. And Harry joined the Met in 1925. He worked in Chiswick, in Hammersmith, in Wandsworth, and he was openly gay, but really popular amongst his colleagues and with the villains, despite of his sexual orientation. He was never arrested. He went about his work with gusto, was proud, and delivered a great service to his community. He wrote an autobiography. He dated E.M. Forster, the author, for a period of time, and he wrote an autobiography.
Are you okay just to hold for a second? It looks like
Sure.
my video's frozen.
Sure.
Should we swap?
We knew that we'd hit a technical problem.
Andy, should we swap?
Yeah, can do. We're going to
No,
swap.
you're back now. Do you want to carry on?
Oh, yeah, I'll carry on then.
Carry on till the end, and then we'll...
So just a couple of minutes on Harry. So he was admonished. He was never arrested. We don't really know why that was. We think that colleagues in the Met turned a blind eye because he was such a great copper. He was a very popular man. He wrote an autobiography. It was called This Small Cloud. He had a really successful career in the Met. He retired in 1950 and died in 1971. And I'll close on what he said about his life. He said in his autobiography, "My life has been delightful and given a chance by God or somebody of another life at the end of this, then I'd say without hesitation, same again, please." It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you today. I hope you've enjoyed what I've had to say and that I've given you some food for thought. There's my contact details should you wish to get in touch with me. I know that we've got other speakers to come next. I hope you've enjoyed what I've had to say so far, and thank you all very much.